Thanks for sitting down to talk with me, Dad. I've always been curious about how you experienced the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah. Okay.
So, first question, where were you in life when the 2008 financial crisis happened?
So where was I in life? I was actually at a pretty good point in life. Things were going well. My job was going well. And you were born, right, in 2008. So, as parents, we were going through, a family, right? Building a family. So all that was new for us, right? When the market started to turn in that summer, right? And that's kind of when, recognized that things were not going so well in the market. But I say it was a good time. It was an exciting time for us because you were born, and you get into your first few months. Right?
Next question. What do you remember about when things first started to feel uncertain or unstable financially?
So it's funny that you asked that because I remember when Lehman Brothers actually when they went under, right? I worked at Morgan Stanley, right? And so when Lehman went down, it was like uh-oh. And then I remember in the office there was a lot of concern about the markets, about what was happening with Morgan Stanley stock. We started to see that there was a run in Morgan Stanley stock and people were actually shorting the stock. And as a result of that, we were really hit hard and we weren't sure. I remember seeing on a Friday afternoon where our numbers were like just going down, down, down. And when we were leaving the office, we were all concerned. We thought that we wouldn't come back to a company come Monday morning. That's how severe it was. We actually had a computer set up in our office, an isolated one that actually had like the market time, real time, tickers and everything that's going on. And we were really scared at that point. We were just like, ooh, I don't think we're gonna have a company come Monday morning.
Mm-hmm. So how did the crisis affect your job or work situation?
So as a result of the crisis, I actually did lose my job. I was actually laid off, and I actually kind of expected it, given the way that things were going. And I remember the morning. I remember getting up one morning and saying to myself, I think this is going to be it. I think this is going to be my last day there. And I had already packed my desk a few weeks before because I kind of expected something was going to happen. And I remember taking a shower, standing in the shower, and water running, over me, and I'm saying, "Oh man, I think this is going to be my last day." Someone just told me. And I remember going into the office. This is in Lower Manhattan, and I remember sitting at my desk. And within 3 minutes of me sitting at my desk, my phone rang. And I'm like, okay, here comes the call. And it was our MD. And he said, Adrian, I need you to come down to the fourth floor. Fourth floor is where HR lived. And I said, okay, Jim, yeah, I know, I understand. And so I walked down there. On my way down, I saw a couple people. I'm like, this is gonna be it. Because I knew the drill. So I went and I saw him, and he says, Adrian, I have bad news. I said, I know. And there was actually tears in his eyes, right? And he says, I'm so sorry, it's not about your performance or anything like that. I said, I know it's a really tough time. And, he said, we'll take care of you, but, thanks for everything, but I'm so sorry. And then he asked me if I needed to get anything from my desk or pack anything up. I said, no. I said, I'm good. I already had packed stuff anyway, so, you can just have the people ship, my personal items home. And with that, I gave up my phone, company phone, and they had a computer, and I left. And I walked out that morning.
Yeah. What changes, if any, did you have to make at home, like budgeting, spending, or saving?
So I was fortunate, right? Because I had been at Morgan Stanley for so many years that the severance package was actually pretty good, right? Basically, you know, I was going to be paid for a year. I had a year's worth of salary coming, so I was still being paid, even though I was let go, right? So I'd still receive my pay for a year, and there were some other incentives that they actually gave, you know, as part of that, you know, kind of job relocation or you know and so forth. So I was fortunate that that part of it, you know, kind of took a little bit of the stress out, but it was still an anxious time because, you know, what happens after a year, after the money runs out, right? And given the way that the markets were, you know, would I be able to even find a job in a year's time? Because there are other companies that were laying off too. So there was also that. But the immediate financial impact was muted because I was still being paid for up to a year. So yeah, so I was, you know, I was very lucky, in, you know, with that respect.
So were you scared or?
Yeah, I was worried. I wasn't as scared, but I mean, you know, yeah, you know, but I wasn't scared to the point where I was like depressed, right? Because I knew I was going to make the best of the situation, right? Like I said, I'm being paid for the next year, right? And a year is a long time, right? So it was a matter of just kind of figuring out, okay, so what am I going to do now? You know, so it was in November time frame, so Christmas was coming, you know, the holidays were coming. So I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy the time off, right? Spend some time with my son, right? And I did that. You know, we had a great time, right? I used to go around the city, and you know, I'd go to and drink my mojitos, and my son would drink his milk, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And it was really quality time. And as a matter of fact, you know, I got to see you walk, take your first steps, because I was home. So you know, so there were some real positive things that came from it, right?
Did you talk to the rest of the family about what was going on during that time?
Yeah. You know, I called my wife. My wife was the first person I called after I left. You know, I remember actually being devastated, right, and having to leave because, you know, I've been at Morgan Stanley for so many years, right? That was in 2008. I had been at Morgan Stanley since 1997, right? So that was a lot of years. And I remember going into the Borders bookstore, and I remember just sitting down in the aisles, and tears came to my eyes because, you know, leaving that job was like leaving family, right? I basically left, you know, my work family, and in a lot of cases, I spent a lot of time with them because I worked, you know, I was always on call, so we worked closer together. You know, back in those days, you know, everybody was like, you know, like good friends and workers. So, you know, that was hard, right? And so, yeah, I spoke to my wife, your mom, obviously, right? And you know, we talked about, you know, and you know, tried to kind of, you know, just think about things from a positive perspective, and making the best of the situation. And you know, we're blessed, so you know, things happen for a reason, and we made the best of it. Yeah.
What was the hardest part of that period, personally or for our family?
Well, I think the hardest part really was just, you know, not knowing what the future, you know, held, right? And I think I think the first part, you know, just the immediate shock of not having a job and not knowing what the future holds, right? That was really the hardest part. But you know, as the days went by, and you know, you kind of start to kind of figure things out, right? You know, it became something that you kind of dealt with, right? And you know, I was very positive about it, and it actually worked out. Within a few months, I was actually called back to Morgan Stanley to actually work. So I was out in November, and I was rehired, you know, in March. So it was a win-win. Yeah.
Do you remember any moments that stood out, either especially tough or surprisingly positive?
So the surprisingly positive part was what I just mentioned in terms of being rehired, right? So part of what I was doing during, actually at the start of the new year, right? So I got laid off in November, and so we went through the holidays and stuff, and you know, celebrated Christmas and so forth, right? Thanksgiving, Christmas, and when the new year turned, right? Obviously, there's, you know, anticipation stuff, but I started to tutor, volunteer. I was tutoring at Harlem Academy. I was tutoring, one student with math, and I was doing it for a couple of weeks. And I remember walking out after one of the sessions, and I got a phone call, and it was someone I had worked with at Morgan Stanley previously. And he said, "Hey, Adrian, hey, how are things going?" He says, "Hey, Jim Traverso, who was the MD, who had tears in his eyes, who had to let me go, gave him my name and said, hey, you should reach out to him. He's probably looking for a job, right?" And so he did. He called me, and I knew Samika before, and we talked. And the position he had was very interesting. Not something I'd done before, but I knew enough about operational stuff to actually take on the role. And and so I got hired back, in March. So that was one of the surprising things, how quickly I actually went back into the workforce, right? So I was out in November, and then I was back, in the same company, in March, right? So that was one of the surprising things, and positively.
How did living through that time change how you think about money, security, or planning for the future? Your habits or beliefs about finances changed since then?
Not so much has changed, but it's one of those things where you need to save for a rainy day, right? If anything that came out of it, right, because the way things happen these days, right, at any given time, right, companies can downsize, right? So you have to be fiscally smart, right, and make sure that you always have a little nest egg, saved up. So in the event that something like this happens again, at least you'll be able to, survive, at least, be able to pay your bills for a period of time, right? Until you land on your feet, right? So, so if anything, that's something that certainly, I've learned from that experience.
Finally, what lessons from that experience do you think are still relevant today, or that you hope I take away?
So when it comes to the financial markets, okay, they can be quite volatile, right? So you need to pay attention, right? With our economies and the way things run, right? At any given time, markets go up and markets go down. So you really have to pay attention and be savvy, be smart, right? I'm not that smart, with the markets and stuff, but I think you have an opportunity of learning even more, right, where you are. I knew nothing about the market at your age. I didn't know anything about stock markets. I just see my dad used to, read the newspaper and look at stuff, but he never really taught me about it. He never really told me about it, right? So I didn't really have that background. I didn't really see how important it was. Kind of wish I had actually maybe challenged him and talk a lot more and ask a lot more questions, right? And invested early, right? You have an opportunity of investing early. You're going through this class now. You're asking me about 2008, right? All of this stuff here, right, is really things that is setting the foundation for you for the future, right? So continue to learn as much about the market as possible and learn how to invest. Be a savvy investor. Save. I know you're already frugal, because I know you still have all those birthday cards saved up, right? Continue to do that, right? Be wise in your savings and in your investments, okay? So.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing this, and it helped me understand not just what happened, but also how it shaped you and us. So thank you.
You're most welcome, son.